Baruch Shechianu v'kimanu v'gyanu lazman hazeh, to the conclusion of, as I said, Baruch Shechianu v'kimanu v'gyanu lazman hazeh, to the conclusion of Masechtas Bava Kama, and the last two parakim of this Masechta is pretty hard, and I really applaud everybody for sticking in with it. We are sponsored throughout this Masechta by A.B. Spry for the troops and for the safety of Klal Yisrael. A.B. is going to be sponsoring Bava Metzia as well. Shimon Klein, Lina Nishmas Asher Anshman Yehuda, Gitta Shimon Pinchas, Irving Fishbaum for Issa ben Rezel and Eliezer ben Rezel for Meir ben Chayesara. They should have a refuah shalema b'seich sharcha Yisrael. We welcome in Saba. We welcome in A.B. Spry, Mel Zachter, Eddie Chazan, Menachem Yemansky, Dr. Block, Ruven Pollack, Shelley Zeitlin, Yisrael Fisher, Stephen Holtzman, Nachman Chapler, Irving Fishbaum, Baruch Ian, who just attended my shir in Deerfield. He got a double header tonight. Mark Frankel, Gitz Fuchs. I'm going to have the pleasure of being by Baruch in the Shtibel for Shalosh Shudas. Michal, Moy Kushner, back from the hospital. Great to have you back. Shimon Klein, Avram Rezepkowitz, Ilya Shutman, Moshe Lehman, Naftali Javelin. It's good to have you back, Naftali. We've been missing you. Rabbi Kranz, Mitchell Flam. I'm not sure. Is this Mati Eisenberg? I don't know. It says Mati. I don't know. Aaron Swade is here. Avram Hecht is here. Okay, so we are holding on the top of Daf Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top. So he said that in our Bavusta, well-known Ganav, Eddie, so V'loi Mishaymrei Peiris, you cannot buy, if Eddie guards fruit, you cannot buy from him wood or fruit. Rav Zavin Shevishta Me'arisa. Rav bought twigs from a vineyard from a sharecropper. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye says, how could he do that? You can't buy from guards of fruit, eitzim or peiris. So Amalei, Hani Mili Rishaymer Delesle Begufa de Aramide. That's only a guard who gets paid cash. He gets paid rubles. He gets paid shkolim. Aval Oris Dislay Begave, but an Oris that gets a percentage, he gets a third of the twigs, a third of the vines, a third of the grapes. So he's selling his percentage, and therefore you could buy from him. Tan Rabbanan. Sandy Grunfeld has just joined us, and it's great to have you. Tan Rabbanan. Shoymei Peiris, Loikhin Mehem, you could buy from guards of fruit, Kishain Yoishvin Umaykrin, when they're sitting out in the public and selling Vasalim Lifneim with baskets in front of them, a Turtani Lifneim, and a scale in front of them. Because obviously, if they would be thieves, they wouldn't be so brazen to do it so publicly. The owner would come and catch them. However, even if they do it in public, the Kulan Sha'amru, if they tell, Steve comes to buy, and they tell him, put it under your jacket, hot main, put it under your jacket, then also, because then that's suspicious. But that's only if they set up the store at the opening of the garden. If they do it in a clandestine way, behind the garden, that's not allowed. That looks suspicious. Itmar, Gazlan, a thief, may emas mutter liknai seimenu. When are you allowed to buy from him? In other words, he's a thief. When are you allowed to buy things from him? Rav Amar Achete Raiv Mishaloi. Until you know that the majority of what he's selling is his own stock. V'Shmuel Amar Shmuel says, Afilu miyad shaloi. You could buy from him even if only a small percentage is his own stock. Oirele Rav Yehuda, the Adadaila. Adadaila, it's an interesting term, Daila. Daila, Rashi says, Daila is a Shamish de Rabbanon. He was an attendant of the rabbis. Was like a Shamish for Rebbes. So, Orale Rav Yehuda la'adadaila, Rav Yehuda paskin to Ada the Shamish, Kedivrei Aimer afilu miyat shaloi. Even according to the Man Yom, that says even if this Ganav, only a small percentage of his stock is not stolen merchandise, you're allowed to buy from him. Maman Moser, the money of an informer. Now we're talking about serious stuff. We don't even want to do this to Eddie. We don't want to call him an informer. A murderer is one thing, but an informer,
Mark, you volunteering for the role?
I'm only volunteering if somebody else has to fill the role. Marshall's not here. So
No. For an informer, we're going to use Chatzkel. He's our fall guy. An informer is a serious thing. The Gemara tells us that an informer that informed on Yidden 3 times, so he's a habitual informer, you're allowed to kill him. You're allowed to throw him down a deep pit. So an informer is bad news. Just simply stated, it's bad news. So says the Gemara, Mammon Maser, the money of an informer. Rav Huna v'Rab Yehuda, Chara Mamuter la'abdoi biyad, you could destroy it expressly. You could openly destroy it. V'chadamar osir la'abdoi, you're forbidden to destroy it. Biyad. Mandi amamuter la'abdoi biyad, you could destroy it because you're allowed to kill him. So if you're allowed to kill him, you could surely destroy his money. Lo yehei mamayna yichama megufay, his money shouldn't be better than his body. Umandi ama osir, this is very interesting. The Mandi ama that says osir, it's because we say that this Moser might have good grandchildren or good children. So leave his money alone. Maybe he'll have good children. The Ksiv Yochan Rasha, the wicked prepares, V'tzadik Yilbish, and the righteous use it. In other words, sometimes Hashem gives money to the wicked, and the righteous get to benefit from it. There's a famous psak from the Ramah Mepanu. The Ramah Mepanu was given a question, a man who obviously didn't have a good son. Boy, I see Aaron Swade is really having trouble hooking on. Aaron, I'm sorry you're having so much trouble getting on to us tonight. Anyway, there was a man who left the tzavah that the Rav of the town should do with his money the best thing possible. So when the man died, they had a whole shaila: should they give the money to Pidyon Shvuyim to redeem captives? Should they give the money to Talmidei Chachamim learning Torah for Abatzas HaTorah? So they went and they asked the Ramah Mepanu, and the Ramah Mepanu shocked them and said, give the money to the children. Now the children were not good. So the psak shocked the people. But the Ramah Mepanu said, don't be smarter than God. Don't be smarter than Hashem. Hashem said to give it to the children. Right? If a man dies, give it to the children. Obviously the idea is that Mirz Hashem, those children will have good children. And that's, the idea of this Gemara. Rav Chisda Havalei Hahu Arisa. Rav Chisda had a sharecropper. David Tokel v'Yoiv Tokel v'Shokel. Instead of taking a third, he took half for himself and half for Rav Chisda. So he was He was stealing, right? He was only supposed to take 33.33%, and he took 50%. So, Solke. So he fired him, and he kept the portion, the last portion, a big amount, he kept it for himself. Kari Anafshe, and Rav Chisda said, referring to himself, V'tzofin l'tzadik, and it's stored for the righteous, chayil choyte, the strength of the sinner. Now, the pasuk says, the pasuk says, Kimat tikvas chonef. What is the hope of the flatterer, the hypocrite? Ki yifta, when he steals. Ki yishal eluka nafshay. Hashem will draw from him his soul. Now, b'pashtus, his soul means the thief. But we'll see that it's not simple, the meaning over here. The Gemara tells us, Rav Huna v'Rav Chisda, it's a machlokes Rav Huna v'Rav Chisda, Chad Amar Nafshay de Nigzel, that it means the soul of the victim. V'Chad Amar Nafshay shel Gazlan, and one says it means the soul of the thief. Now, of course, to learn that it means the soul of the thief, that's the simple pshat, that Hashem will snatch or throw away the soul, this thief's soul. But how do you learn? How do you learn the pasuk if it means the soul of the victim? So the Gemara says, "Manda amar nafshay shel nigzal," the one that says it means the soul of the victim. Dichsiv kain orchas kol boitzeya betza. So is the way of all those that steal. Es nefesh ba'olav yikach. They're taking the very soul of its owner. See, there's a reason why our parnas is called a livelihood, because it's our very life. And the person who takes away a person's life savings is snatching their life. And that's why, by the way, money is called damim, blood, because we give our blood for our money. And by the way, that's also the reason why tzedakah tatzim l'mavos. You see, if a person makes $50 an hour and he gives $500 to tzedakah, what's he doing? He's giving away 10 hours of his life. And Hashem says, I pay 500 to 1. So a person's money is his life. So the way they explain the pasuk, kimat tikvas chonef, what's the hope of the chonef? Ki yivtza, when he steals, ki yishal eloka nafshay, because Hashem will cast him away from taking the soul of the victim. Mandam nafshay shel gazlan, dichsiv al tigzel dol. Don't rob a poor person kidolu because he's poor and he has nobody to defend him. Va'al tzedakah ani b'shar. Don't crush a poor man at the gate. Ki Hashem yorev rivam. Hashem will fight his fight. V'kova es kaveyem, and he will snatch from those that snatch them their nefesh, their soul, their life. So the Gemara says, V'idach nami hoksiv nefesh ba'olav yikach. The one that learns that it's referring to the nefesh of the gazlan, but it says nefesh ba'olav yikach, that when you steal, you take the life of the victim. Says the Gemara, no, it means nefesh ba'olav yikach. Hashem will take away the nefesh of the new balim, of the thief. My ba'olav the hashta, the thief. V'idach nami yoksiv b'koive es kaveim nefesh, that he will snatch the cover as kaveim, and he will snatch from the robbers their life. So you see, it's talking about the nefesh of the gazlan. Matam kama, matam the cover as kaveim. Why will Hashem snatch from them? Mishum the cover nefesh, because they snatched the life of the person that they vandalized. In general, we have to know that the Torah is very severe when it comes to withholding wages. Because of this reason, a person gives his life for his money. And when you take money away from people, it's like taking away their very life. You cheat people, it's like taking away their very life. Now, Amar Reb Yochanan, whoever steals from his friend the value of a pruta, if a person steals from someone the value of a pruta, it's like taking his very life from him. So is the way of anyone that steals for profit. As nefesh ba'alav yikach, you take away the life of the person. V'aymer v'achal es kitzircha, and he will take your harvest, v'lachmacha, your bread, yoichlu banecha v'naisecha, and that's tantamount to eating your sons and your daughters, because then you won't have what to feed them. V'aymer mechamas b'nei Yehuda, from the extortion of Bnei Yehuda, asher shafchu dam noki ba'atzam, that spilled innocent blood in the land. V'aymer el Shaul ve'el beis adamim, Shaul and his murderous house, al asher heimes es ha'gevaynim, that he killed the Gevaynim. Now, of course, Shaul didn't kill the Gevaynim. Shaul killed Noivir HaKohanim. But since they used to give bread and water to the Gevaynim, so it was like he killed the Gevaynim. Now the question is, so we say that stealing from people is like taking their lives. But why do we have all of these different psukim? Why do we need all of these different psukim? So says the Gemara, welcome Dr. Yudel. Says the Gemara, Mai v'omer, what are all of these psukim? V'chiteim and nefesh didei, that it's considered that you're taking the life of the victim, but how do we know that it extends to his children? Aval nefesh banav of naisav lo, it doesn't extend to being tantamount to taking away the lives of the sons and the daughters. Tashma b'sar banav of naisav, by plundering from a person, you're taking away the food for his family. That's only with open stealing, not extortion when you pay money. Chamas is extortion where you pay money, just force the person to sell it. Tajma me chamas b'nei Yehuda, even extortion. Asher shafchu dam naki ba'atzam, it's considered like spilling innocent blood. When you do it openly. But if you just cause it, aval gram alay, but not for causing it, Tajmal Shaul vel beis adamim, Shaul and his murderous house, al asher hemes es hagavayim, for killing the Gevayim. Now Shaul never killed the Gevayim. V'chi heichem matzinu shaharag Shaul es hagavayim. Ela mitoch shaharag Noiv irak Kahanim, since he killed Noiv, the city of Kahanim, which used to support Shayu Maspikim Lahem Mayim Amazin, they used to support the people, the Gevayim, with food and water. Malav Allah's Akasav Ki'ilu Hargan. It's considered as if he killed them. Okay, just getting on the way over here on a late night evening. We want to thank everybody for accommodating us for this late night. We need to be mafarsim that Motzei Shabbos at 8:15 we're starting Bava Metzia. I mean that's an amazing thing. Starting Bava Metzia in Mitzvah Hashem, and we hope that people will tell people and bring a friend. Again, we give a shout out to Yitzi Muller, who's in the middle of Sheva Brachas now, and we know that's why he's not with us. And we're missing Shimon Deer. Does anybody have the graphic artistry that if I send them a flyer, they could doctor it up and put in the New Times and put in Bava Metzia? Does anybody know how to do that? Don't all answer at once. Okay. That's why we don't have these flyers.
Is it a PDF or is it something else?
I doubt it's a PDF. It's just a flyer.
I could look at it.
Okay, I'll send it to you. What should I send it to you on regular text?
No, either email or WhatsApp.
Okay, I'll send it to you on a WhatsApp.
The Rav could send it to me as well, because I might, if it's photoshoppable, I might be able to do something.
Okay, very good. Remember, if it is 8:15 on Motzei Shabbos and 8 o'clock throughout the week. Okay. Now, the Mishnah continues, Avaloichim and Anoshim, but you could buy from women, Tan Rabbanan, Loichim and Anoshim, you could buy from women Klei Tzemah Yehuda, woolen clothing in Yehuda, because that's what they do their work with, or Klei Pishtim Bagalal, and linen garments in Galil, Avalo Yenas Shmanim Uslasais, but not wine, oil, and flour, because we're afraid they're pilfering it from their husbands. You can't buy it all from people's slaves or children. She could sell for a small amount of 4 or 5 dinners worth. To make a hair covering for her head, because we assume that the husband is fine for that. In any case where the woman says to hide it, that's awesome, because that shows that she's doing it without the will of her husband. That's why she wants you to hide it. When a woman gives tzedakah, a gabait tzedakah could accept from them a small amount, because he could assume that the husbands are agreeable to that. But not a big amount, because maybe they're doing it without the will of their husbands. Aleph, people that work in the olive press, they could buy from them in large amounts, because if they're selling it in large amounts, they would be afraid to do so, so obviously their husbands are approving of it. But not small amounts of olives and oil, because that they might be doing without the rishus of their husbands. You could buy from women a small amount of olives because we assume that the husband is embarrassed to sell that small amount, and therefore he gives his wife to sell it to sell it by his door, and gives it to his wife to do it. Now he said that you could take from a woman a small amount of tzedakah, but not a big amount of tzedakah. Ravina visited Mechuzah. Mechuzah was Rabba's town. Mechuzah was a wealthy town because it was a port city. Port cities were very wealthy because they had a tremendous income from import and export. So Ravina Ikla Lebei Mechuzah, Asim Nishei Debein Mechuzah, the wives of Mechuzah came, and Ramu Kamei Kavle Visheri, they gave him for tzedakah golden chains and bracelets or anklets. So the Gemara tells us, really fascinating, the Gemara says, Kabal Binayu, Ravina accepted it. So Amalei Rabbi Taisva Ravina, so Rabbi Taisva said to Ravina, how could you accept it? It says that you're not allowed to accept tzedakah from women in large amounts. Only a small amount of a loy davar meruba, not a large amount. Amalei, so he said, you have to know it's all relative what's called a small amount. In Mechuzah, these are very wealthy families. These baubles of chains and anklets or bracelets is small potatoes for the people that live here. Amalei, hani l'bnei Mechuzah, these baubles, these trinkets for the Bnei Mechuzah, dvar mu'at nino, because they're very wealthy and it's a small amount. The husbands would definitely not be makbid. Okay, just getting underway over here, but already half a blot done on our last daf of Masechtas Bava Kama. I will tell you that the next part is very technical. It took me a long time to prepare. I want to thank BRS, where I daven Shachris at 9:15 every morning, and then I usually learn there till 12, and I was preparing to share there today. Muchin shakayves moitzi. When the launderer does wool, so shreds of wool come out in the laundering process. Hari elu shaloi. He could keep those amounts of wool. They're negligible, and therefore the balabayas readily accepts that the launderer could keep it. V'asayrek, but the comber, who removes a lot more of the material, v'asayrek, but that which the sayrek is mitzi, that which the comber takes out, hari elu shel balabayas, he has to give it back. Now, this is an interesting thing. When the weaver weaves the woolen garments, he puts extra 3 threads at the end of the garment, so that the garment doesn't fall apart in the washing process. And the launderer removes those 3 threads and keeps them. Kaivetz neitel shloisha chutin, he takes those 3 threads at the end of the garment, vehein shaloi. Yes, it but if there's more than 3 threads, harielu shel balabais, it goes to the owner. However, if it was a white garment and the threads at the end of the garment, to make sure it doesn't unravel, was a different color, black, so it's obviously meant to be removed. If it's black threads on top of white threads, he takes all those black threads that were put in that shouldn't unravel in the laundering process. Hachayit, a tailor, that after making the suit, he has left over enough thread to sew with. We'll see how much that is. Or matlis, or a patch, that's 3 by 3 finger breadths. That goes back to the owner. Now let's talk about a carpenter. Masha chorish moitzi b'matzad, when the carpenter uses a plane. Harielu shaloi, a plane takes off minimal amount, and therefore that belongs to the carpenter. Ubakosher, but that which he chops off and trims off with an axe, that shall balabais. That's a larger amount that he gives to the owner. But if he's working on the owner's premises, then even the sawdust that falls onto the owner's property belongs to the owner. Then af hanesiris, even the sawdust goes to balabais, goes to the balabais. Now says the Gemara, so fasten your seatbelts, Rabbi say, for some technicalities. There's some technicalities over here. You don't want to finish this Masechta in an easy way. Come on, I mean, there was a whole. Mark says I got to get my money's worth. This was a hard 2 prakim. I'm not gonna end it off in a wimpy way. Come on. I'm a little winded. I just gave a major share in Deerfield. Tanarabanan. Loikin muchin min akayves. You could buy the pieces of fluff of wool from the launderer, because we said because we said that he's allowed to keep them. He could take the 2 threads at the edge, and they're his. Now the Gemara is going to ask, we said 3 threads. Why does it say only 2 threads? So we'll see. It's talking about different types of thread. Okay, now we're getting very technical. You see, when the Syrik or the Kaives is cleaning the garment, afterwards they stretch it. to take out the wrinkles. That when they stretch it on a frame, and they attach loops to attach it to the frame, and on both sides of the frame they attach it and they pull it so it straightens out. Now, when in order to attach it to the frame, they don't attach the garment itself to the frame. They don't want to ruin the garment, so they sew loops. And on these loops, they shouldn't put more than 3 stitches in each loop, because they don't want it to stretch too much and to affect the beged too much. We know that a beged is made shesi and erev, the warp thread, and then in the other way is introduced, the warp thread is lined up on the loom, and in the other direction is introduced the weft thread. Now, there's some garments where the weft thread is the one that you end up seeing, and there's some garments that the warp thread is what you end up seeing. But in this case, we're talking about a garment where the weft thread is the dominant thread that you see. And therefore, you don't do it in the direction of the warp thread, in the direction of the weft thread. The din is that when they stretch it, so after they stretch it, then the beged, because it was stretched and it was attached with loops, so the beged, when it's stretched, the parts where the loops are, it causes the beged to be a little uneven. So the presser or the stretcher is allowed to cut it along its edge in order to make it even. To cut off somewhere it's bulging a little bit, he's allowed to cut it to make it even. So where does he do it? Since they only pulled it on 2 sides, they didn't pull it on 4 sides, so they pulled it along the length, so therefore he could equalize it and make it straight on the length. He has no right to cut it on the width because they didn't stretch it by the width. And when he makes it straight, sometimes he could cut ad tefach rasha. He could cut up to a tefach. Amamar, shnei chutin, 2 threads. But what we said that you can make 3 stitches. Why does it say over here only 2 stitches? Shnei chutin. We said that here it says that the launderer could take the 2 threads at the end of the garment. But vanan tanan shalish, we said that you could take 3 threads. Says the Gemara, like kasha haba'alime habiktine. If they're thick threads, you could take 2. If they're thin threads, you could take 3. V'lo yisrei kabeged l'shesyai ela la'arvai. Ay v'tanya ipcha. We learned the opposite. Says the Gemara, like kasha habeglima habesarbala. One is talking about a regular weekday cloak, and one is talking about a fancy, sophisticated cloak. By one, they made the Erev dominant, and one they made the Shesi dominant. And you can't put in more than 3 stitches for each loop. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah, when it says 3 stitches, is the putting in the needle and taking it out considered 1. Or putting the needle in and taking it out is already considered 2. Says, you want to take it, we'll leave that up to Eliyahu. You could make it straight along its length. We learned like the opposite. that you could level it on the width and not along the length. Says, well, like kasha, habeglima, if it's a cloak, so then they stretched it along its length. Habehem yoine, if it's a belt, the main part of the belt is the part that hangs down when you tie it in front of you. So there you want the width to be straight. So there they stretched it on its width. Tanrabanan, ein loikin min asayrik muchin, you can't buy from the Comer muchin, because we already explained that by the Comer, a lot more came out, and that belongs to the Baal Bayis. Mipnei she'ein shaloi. But in a place where they gave the Comer the fluff that came out, then loikin, you could buy it. You could buy a pillow full of fluff, the keses malaya muchin, and a blanket full of fluff, because even if they stole it, so then they were kind it with shinui, so that's yush and shinui, so you could buy it from them. My timer, kananeya b'shinui, they acquired it with shinui. Tan Rabbanan. Oh, I'm uncharacteristically a little bit out of breath. Tanrabanan. Ein loikin migarde. Now here we're going to get again some very, very technical language. When doing the weaving and introducing the weft thread into the warp thread went one way and the weft thread was introduced in the other direction, they used a buchier. A buchier was a shuttle that contained the yarn. And the yarn was put on a spindle, and the spindle was pushed into the shuttle, and it was held in place, it was stuffed in place with pieces of material. Those pieces of material were called irin. And these irin were the property of the balabayas. So you can't buy from, therefore, you can't buy from the weaver, lo irin, because as we said, these plugs of wool that were put in the shuttle to hold the spindle in place, these belonged to the balabayas, and therefore you can't buy it from the weaver. V'loy nirin. Now, this is bate nirin is a part of the process of the weaving. Obviously, when we introduce the weft thread into the warp thread, it would be tedious to go in and out and in and out and in and out. There could be hundreds of threads. So what we do is we have two harnesses that first lifts up all the odd threads of the warp threads, and then you put the weft in, then you put down the shuttle with the odd threads, and you pick up a shuttle with the even threads, and then you bring the weft thread back. So this way, that's how you weave. Now, the warp threads were put into the shuttle through what's called nirin, heddles. The shuttle had heddles, and you introduced, before you put the warp thread all the way on the other side of the loom, on the frame, you introduced all the even threads in the heddles of the even harness, and all the odd threads in the heddles of the odd harness. Those are called, the heddles in the harness are called nirin. And again, that's the property of the owner, and therefore you can't buy it from the weaver. V'loy punkelin. Now, punkelin, this is really a sophisticated language. The punkelin is if you're talking about in certain looms, they used a standing harness. And no, it's a standing loom. And if you use not normally the loom that we talk about is one that's lying. A standing loom, so there they had to introduce the web thread using punkulin, using different equipment. And this is how they introduced the web thread in a standing loom. V'loi shiurei pikiyos. Now, shiurei pikiyos, as I told you, that this is going to be a very, very technical Gemara. The shiurei pikiyos are the leftover thread on the spindle that goes to the balabayas, so you can't buy it from the weaver. Avaloikin mehem beged menumer, but you could buy from them a beged that's spotted with many different materials, because even if they stole it, or erev v'shesi, or the weft, or a beged made of weft or warp thread of many different materials, because there, even if they stole it, they're kind of with yish and shina rishus. And also tavi v'arig, and something that was spun or something that was woven. So the Gemara says, well, since weaving comes after spinning, if you could buy it from them if they already spun it, you surely should be able to buy it from them if they wove it. Imrei hashta tavi shaklei, if you could buy it if it's spun, arig mebai, is it a question? You could buy it when it's woven? Says the Gemara, my arig, what does it mean, woven? Tiki, that's woolen chains that are made without spinning it. So it's weaving without spinning. That's why it has to say it. Tana Rabbanan. Ein loikin min atzava, you can't buy from a dyer, loy oisais, not wool that was used for a test. What happens is the buyer comes and brings wool, and he says, I want you to show me how the color will look. Now afterwards, that wool belongs to the buyer. So you can't buy it from the dyer. V'loi dugmais. Sometimes the buyer will bring a sample to show the tzava, I want something that looks like this. And again, that sample belongs to the owner, so you can't buy it from him. V'loi tlushim shel tzemer, nor wool that's torn off. This wool that's torn off belongs to the owner. Avaloi k'mem beged savua, but you could buy a dyed piece of clothing. Tavui, avaloi k'mem beged savua tavui. You could buy from them a beged savua, a dyed garment, because again he would be kind of with shinoi. Tavui, spun, or begodim that were made from samples. So the Gemara says, hash the tavi shakel, if you could buy even spun, begodim ibai, sure you could buy it if it was made into a garment. Says the Gemara, my begodim namte, that's felt, which is made from just pressing it, even though it's not spun fibers. And you keep that also, because he was kind of with shinoi. Tan Rabbanan, hanoising oirois la abdon, if you give hide to the tanner, hakitzuin, that which he cuts off to trim it, vatlushim, and the wool that's pulled off of the hide, harielu shabal bais, that goes back to the owner. Va'oila mishetef hamayim, but in the tanning process they washed the hide. The wool that comes off from the hide in the washing process, harielu shaloi, that belongs to the tanner. Now, let's get back to the threads that were put. I'm telling you, this is till the end. It's very technical. Says the Gemara, we said that at the end of the garment, they put threads so that in the washing, it shouldn't unravel. We said if those threads are black on white, so then the kaivis could keep all the threads. I'm Rabbi Yehuda, Katzra Shmei. It's interesting that a launderer, we have through Shas, it's called the Katzra. And now the Gemara says etymologically it makes sense. The katz v'shokala, he could shorten it by taking these threads at the end of the garment. Rabbi Yehuda, hakol oilen laminyan tchelas. If Baruch wants to put tzitzis at the end of his garment, and there are these threads that were put there so that it shouldn't unravel, if the threads were there, he could put the tzitzis after the threads. It's all considered part of the garment. However, the Gemara tells us, Rabbi Yehuda says, "V'yitzchak brei, Yitzchak my son, kapit alayu," and make sure not to attach the tzitzis until he removes these extra threads. Hachayit sheshayir chut, if the tailor leaves enough thread, enough to sew with, he has to return it back to the owner. The kamalit, for what's considered enough to sew with. Amar Avasi malo machit, a needle's full, and chutzla machit. And then, besides the needle's full. Now, what does it mean? A needle's full, and also another amount. Ibayalu, malay machat v'chutzla machat k'malay machat. In other words, 2 needles fulls, the needle full and another needle full. Aydilma malay machat v'chutzla machat mashu, a needle full and a little bit. Tajma. The Tanya chayit sheshayir esachut pachis miktei litvarbay, less than the minimum amount, or matlish she pchusim mishal shashos, and a patch that's less than 3 by 3, bisman shebalabayis makbid aleim, if the balabayis is makbid even on that small amount, harielu shel balabayis. Ein balabayis makbid aleim, if the balabayis is not makbid, harielu shaloi. Now, iyamir bishloima maloi machat v'chutz l'machat k'maloi machat, a machat full, and then another machat full is the minimum share. Pakas mekan, less than that we said that maybe the balabayis might want it, chazi l'sichsa, it's still fit for attaching the loop to the garment when you need to stretch it. But if the shear is malay machat and a little bit more, pakas mekan, less than that, how could it be that the balabayis would be makbid l'may chazi? It's not fit for anything. It means a needle full plus another needle full, shmamina. And now we go back to the carpenter. Ma'asher chorish, what the chorish removes with the plane, he could keep. What he removes with the axe, he has to give to the owner. Or aminu, ma'asher chorish moitzi b'matzad, that which he takes off with a plane, v'anifzik b'mageira, and that which he cuts off with a saw, harielu shel balabayis. But v'ayoytzi mitachas magdeach, but the tiny amount that comes from a drill, or mitachas rehitni, or a fine plane, v'anigur b'mageira, or the sawdust that comes from the saw, that harielu shaloi, that the carpenter could keep. But here you see it says that b'matzad belongs to the balabayis, while we learned in the Mishnah that matzad, the plane, belongs to the carpenter. Amarava ba'asra d'tana didan, in the locality of our Tana, iketarte chatzine. There were 2 types of chopping tools. L'rabose korile kishil, to the big one it's called an axe, or l'zitrase korile matzad. The planing instrument that just took off a fine amount, that was called a matzah. So therefore, that belongs to the carpenter. But ba'asr the tana bra, but in the place of the brisa, charu deika, that which is called a matzah is really chops off more, v'karele matzah, and therefore that goes to the balabayis. If the work was done on the premises of the owner, then he keeps even the sawdust. Tan Rabbanan, misatete avonim, a person that chisels rock, ein b'hem mishum gezel, he gets to keep all the residue all the psilus, all the residual stuff that he chisels out, he gets to keep. Mefaske ilanos, those that trim trees. Mefaske gefan, those that trim vines. Menakfe hige, those that prune thorns. Menakshe zram, those that weed seeds. V'oidre yerakos, those that prune vegetables. Bisman shabalabais makbad aleim, if the balabais wants the twigs, the vines, the stuff that's weeded out from the seeds, and the stuff that's trimmed from the vegetables, yesh b'mishum gezel. Then, if the worker keeps it, it's thievery. Ein balabais makbad aleim, if he doesn't mind, arielu shalai. And now for the final statement of the Masechta. We should have a drum roll over here. How exciting is this? This was really very hard to prakim. Really very hard. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, kashus, which is hops, the chazis, and grain that's a third grown, green grain. Ein b'hem mishum gezel. There's no theft. Now, how can there be no theft? If you're going to cut off people's green grain, it's not going to grow. It seems to be that this is talking about a place where animals graze, and the grazing actually facilitates better growth. And therefore, if the owner doesn't have his own animals, he's not makbid that other people should have their animals graze, which will facilitate better growth. However, ba'aser de kapte, but if the owner has his own animals, so he doesn't need anybody else grazing there, then yesh ben mishum gezel. Then there is thievery. Amar Ravina, umasa mechasya, and I'm not going to say the last three words because we want to save it for the siyam. But masa mechasya was a place where they did it on their own. They had their own animals, and therefore people were not allowed to go and graze on the hops or on the green grain. Okay, Rabbi Isaac, wow, mazel tov to everybody. We're now going to do the Mishnah Yomis, so don't go anywhere. Don't even think of going anywhere.